Okay.
Okay, we'll call the Columbia County Land Bank meeting to order. First thing is a roll call
And that be Morel.
here.
Ron Knox, not present. PJ Killer. Present. Brenda Adams.
Present.
Suzette Bowie.
Present.
Patrice Perry.
Here.
Chris Watts.
And I'm here.
That's
Okay,
one.
thank you. August minutes,
Motion. Go ahead, I'll second. Motion to approve the minutes. Second.
all in favor,
Aye.
opposed, carried. We have the pending the CEDC services contract.
Yeah, we had this last month. I think at that point, we weren't entirely sure if Rob had reviewed it or not. We've discovered that he has in the interim, and we passed it at CEDC. Our board passed it at the last board meeting. And Jim Calvin, the board president, has signed the contract. So now there's just, the only thing that's left is for the land bank board to pass it, and then to have the chairman's signature.
And so we need a motion to pass the services contract. So
Okay.
moved. PJ Keeler, second. Chris Watts, all in favor,
Aye.
opposed, carried.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. All right, so the next item is the discussion of the capital budget, but I do want to go back. I included in the email the admin budget that we've already basically won this grant application. So this is up on the screen. So this just shows you the categories for the administration of the budget. This has quite a bit of legal in here, which is pretty standard for new land banks. We've got contracted staff, which is going to be some of what is contained in the CEDC services contract. Some of that is going to spill over as well. I mean, there will be marketing coming out of our office. So most of these line items, CEDC will be performing some aspect of this, not the audit, not legal, not insurance. So those are all pretty boilerplate things they need to carry as a nonprofit organization. Then at the bottom, we've got property maintenance, which obviously is only if we acquire properties. Yeah, so that may need to get slid around over the course of the year. HDR is pretty open to not budget adjustments, but certainly tweaking your line items. So this is what we've already been approved for. HDR has been in contact with us because we received our federal employee identification number, which registers us with the state charitable reporting system. So we're ready to receive their contract. Crystal Loeffler, who administers the land bank program at the state level, emailed last week asking who that contract should be entered into with. I mentioned the chairman. I haven't seen the contract yet. I don't think it's come through the county's offices either. So I'll follow up with Crystal. I'll actually have a conversation with her tomorrow. Very bottom line.
100.
It's just, it should be the total.
Yeah.
It's 100,000, I think.
Yeah, 100,000 is the most you can request as a land bank of a certain budget size, an annual operating budget. Anything below $1 million or anything below $500,000 gets you to 100,000.
But this is 2024 funding, right? Or is,
Yeah, this will be whenever we get that contract. It
Right.
should run from July to July.
so we'd be eligible for additional funding next year?
Capital funding, more administrative funding, yes.
That's what I thought. And that's what this is, administrative funding.
This is just the administrative
Right.
funding, yeah.
What happens if any of those items, I mean, I'm anticipating a lot of them won't be used. What happens with that?
Yeah, you can just
Roll
roll,
over?
yeah, you should be able to roll it over to the next contract. So the way they set up the administrative contracts for the newer land banks, if you haven't received any previous rounds of funding, which really just applies to, I think at this point, 3 land banks, you could apply for this. You have to reapply every year, but you can reapply for different amounts. So if your annual budget changes, you can apply for a different amount of admin funding. And these line items can change not only from contract to contract, they can change within the contract year. You just have to ask permission from HCR, basically.
It's unusually flexible.
They're very flexible. Yeah, that's kind of one of the value adds of land banks as a tool is the flexibility of how the funding can be used. So that's the administrative contracts. What we have coming up that is due by the end of this year is the capital contract. Sec. I won't walk through all of this because this is it's a lot. HCR has kind of changed a lot of their grant programs to now workbooks. So there's an Excel workbook that you've got to go through. If you look at the bottom across the row, all those different sheets are just a different portion of the grant application. In past years, this would just be one big PDF, right? And each page would have, here's this section, so here's your program abstract, here's your program activities. It's essentially the same thing, it's just displayed differently. So you go to program abstract. And there's one question with this little paragraph, this box for you to enter a paragraph, and the rest are pretty similar. You do start to get into some nitty gritty when you get into the actual budgeting pieces, so, this isn't particularly nitty gritty. You've got some staffing and admin capacity that they ask you to fill out. This is all very normal for HCR. Typically what I do, me personally, when they're built like this, I'll just pull out each of these tabs. General is easy, that's nothing. Program abstract, I just make this its own Word document. So I'll have a program abstract Word document, program activities Word document, so on and so forth. And then just once that's all done and we're ready to submit, I just copy and paste it right into this box. I think the big question is going to be for the capital. Oh, no. Yeah, they didn't really break out the line items in this one, which is interesting. The main thing that I wanted to talk about was how many properties do we think we'll acquire over the course of the next 12 months? Because that's going to inform a lot of what we request in the budget. That's going to affect rehab dollars that we request. It's going to affect an acquisition budget that we'd like to request. And then the program that we talked about at the last meeting was the vacant property rental improvement program. So that's the program that's out there, and we talked about this morning at a Housing Task Force Committee meeting. You can request up somewhere between $750,000 and $5 million for the rehabilitation of currently vacant rental units, or just vacant commercial properties that are then converted into rental units, as long as that's no more than 5 units. So we asked Crystal Loeffler again at HCR if there was the potential for land banks to be able to use some of the state land bank funding to supplement that grant, and she said yes. So I can build out most of this budget, this application, and leave kind of a placeholder for if we are approved for the vacant rental improvement program, we'll have this extra line item to kind of supplement that program. The idea there was they're offering 50,000 per unit for certain AMI, or 75,000 per unit for another AMI. My sense is that most landlords that participate in this program across the state are likely to use the $50,000 grant, just because on the back end, it's easier for them to find tenants. There's an 80% AMI cap on the tenancy at the 50,000 level and 60% at the 75,000 level. So I'm assuming most landlords will go for the 50, and the idea was to match 50% of that grant with land bank funds. So say we request $1 million and you're looking at potentially 20 rehabs, the land bank would request $500,000 and then give $25,000 grants to each unit that's being rehabbed.
So Chris, just to clarify, we're looking at basically picking on some of these foreclosures and basically turning them over to the land bank, is that correct? So there won't be any real large initial cost?
Yeah, the acquisition side?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things, and we still need to have the acquisition policy. We have to have the acquisition committee meeting to sort out that policy. What I'm operating from right now is that the land bank will pay the full freight of the back taxes. That's my current assumption. I won't know that for sure until we get into the policy committee.
That's a lot cheaper than a market acquisition.
Cheaper than market, more expensive than land banks traditionally operate.
Right.
But most land banks traditionally operate in much more urban areas where they've got a lot more properties to choose from.
Also, the model changed in the middle.
Yeah.
So,
Not the appraisal value, because that's what we're gonna, that's the appraised value.
Right.
Right,
And that's the problem we're gonna run into with the new Supreme Court ruling. It's gonna be a problem there.
well, that's what I said about the model changing, but if we acquire it for back taxes. Can we just acquire it for back taxes? No.
Well,
it would have to go out to public sale.
Okay.
Right, so we'll go out to public auction. And then I assume the minimum bid would be set for the back taxes owed. And then it's just up to whoever the committee is that decides who the sales go to. It'll be up to them if that's if they want the land bank to have it or not, but at that point, the initial pitch to HCR or to ESD and, to the board as well. The land bank would only acquire properties after careful consultation with the towns and villages and where those properties are located. So by the time it gets to a public auction, that town or village should have already said, we would like this property to be in the land bank. But again, I think this is all, these are committee questions.
Who's gonna pay the delta to the property owner who now has the right to have full appreciation of their property?
Well, that was when we were looking at the amendments to chapter 11, I think this might have been 2 meetings ago. If you have a public sale and a property sells for a certain amount, their surplus is determined at the sale. So if there's no, if the purchase wasn't over and above what the taxes owed were, there wouldn't be a surplus for that property owner to access.
Until they would belong.
No, but they would say, well, no, we'll get the appraisal and we'll say this is what it was really worth. And
But
that would be the difference.
It's the market is what it got at sale, what it gathered at sale. That's not what,
No, I understand that, but what I was anticipating is that, and again, maybe this isn't the right, if we want to
That's okay.
table this conversation, I'm okay with that. Matt?
Yeah.
Table it?
Yeah.
well, I think that, but I think we're doing,
Policy.
without doing the policy part, I think we need to circle back to the original question was, if we're looking at the upcoming sale, are there properties in there that we might be interested in? If we're trying to calculate how many properties we might reasonably acquire this year, were there any? If any, how many?
And based on how the policy is established under the new state law, is it a possibility that the land bank could acquire it or not? And maybe you do the first year where you just take rehab money and do rehabs grants. So it gets sorted out.
Or you would
Or the V-Rips?
number that are just test cases, like maybe 2 of them, just to say, well, let's try this or 1 or whatever and see how it plays out. I don't know.
Yeah, my sense, because the other, if you don't do public sale, this came up last meeting as well. It was basically you had determined that in many of these properties, there was no surplus.
I would imagine that that's gonna be the case, but I think we still have to get, let's say the land bank does want 1 or 2 of these properties and the towns are in favor of it, we'd still have to get the appraisal just to make sure.
Yeah.
And then I would say, I think the approach would be is not to put them up for public auction, just to, earmark them for the land.
Do the appraisal and transfer.
Based on what, the lack of the delta, basically.
Right, and if we did the public auction first, and then pulled it, that's not gonna be well received by
Right.
the auctioneer. Bid.
This is all. Maybe we'll have a guest speaker at the acquisition committee. Somebody who, there are land banks that have been through this already that have already acquired properties in the wake of both the Supreme Court decision and the state's amendments to chapter 11. So I think learning from those guys would probably be the best bet.
That's what I do.
Did we talk about, and forgive me if my memory is spotty, did we talk about possibly acquiring properties through the market that seem to be reasonably or underpriced?
It can be done, yeah, and some land banks have, I don't know if this is their own policy or state policy, because this does differ. Some land banks will only acquire properties that have been foreclosed, whether that's by a taxing jurisdiction or by a financial institution. So they'll go after REO, real estate owned properties. So they'll try to acquire REO properties from banks and they'll take the tax foreclosures, but they won't purchase properties just from the open market.
Is our charter restricted? Does it prohibit us from doing that?
I don't know that answer. We have to find that out.
I don't believe it does.
I don't remember seeing it.
Are there properties on the market that are?
This is Columbia County.
Well, that's the thing.
Every now and again, something pops up, you just have your eyes open for it, yeah.
I did ask, just because, the world in general, land banks that were starting to write their applications for this year's capital funding, which is when you can build in acquisition costs. I asked them what the percent increase was on your line item for acquisition, and some of them are at a 600% increase. So because of the foreclosure question and the acquisition of foreclosures after the Supreme Court decision, they just, tripled, quadrupled, quintupled their acquisition funds. They're doing a little bit less on their rehab side, but that's actually strategically in line with what the state wants. the state would prefer land bank. There's always going to be a little bit of rehab money for land banks, but it's mostly for stabilization. To actually finish units that need to be finished, they prefer that organizations would apply for the grants that are relevant to whatever they're trying to do. So maybe it is the VBRIC, right? The Essex County Land Bank was the applicant for that program. They're not going to supplement it, they're just running the VBRIC program out of the land bank office as the nonprofit for that area.
Is there is there a land bank of our scale or size that is relatively new that we could look back on and see what did they do in terms of their first year or second year?
Yeah, Livingston and Sullivan have been the two that we've taken the most lead from. Sullivan is pretty interesting. Pattern for Progress has taken over the administration of the Sullivan County Land Bank. And we work, CEDC works hand in hand with Pattern on a lot of projects. So I think picking their brains about, they're basically coming into a land bank that needed to be, managed. So it'd be interesting to learn what were some of the things that you saw that new land banks could
Right.
sidestep.
Could you possibly ask for enough money to have one of your test pilot programs be a full acquisition of a property at market?
At market. Right. So an interesting wrinkle of land banks is that they can issue bonds. I'm just saying, it's a power they have.
No, but to your point, if we're looking at appreciation rates like that, if we buy it this year, by the time a developer came along in 2 years, it's worth a lot more than when we bought it.
Given past, like recent past, yes, yeah, for sure.
But there's no guarantee of that moving forward.
No, we'd have to be very careful, but it's a thought.
Well, it's not your money.
Yeah.
Another
Very careful.
He's got the wise guy hat on today.
No, this budget is way more bare bones than I thought it was. I want to go back to the other. I'm gonna go back to the other spreadsheet just because it has more of the line items that I think we want to take a look at.
Walking. Get a walking. Maybe do it talking, because it wasn't there before.
So this capital expenditures line is basically, oh, hang on. This capital expenditures line is basically going to be everything that's going to be in the capital budget. There should be a drop down menu and it looks like they got rid of it. All right. So that's going to be things for demolition. Personally, I wouldn't prefer to acquire any properties that we know need to be demolished unless we know that there are some real problem properties out there. There are new programs specifically for land banks to do demolitions, or I'm sorry, for nonprofits to do demolitions. There's something called the Vacant Property Clearance Program, which is brand new. Municipalities actually have to apply for that so that the county could be the applicant and then pass the money through to the land bank if we wanted to do it that way. That has a wrinkle where anything that you have to leave that parcel vacant for 5 years, unless what you develop on top of that parcel is a CDBG approved activity, which one of the activities happens to be low and moderate income housing. So that would be, I think, what the land bank would want to partner with to develop in any case. I don't know how many properties are out there that we think need to be demolished. I think supervisors have a pretty good handle on that.
What about other site prep?
You can do site prep, so you can actually do some of the site prep with the admin funds. And if we start to not be spending a lot of the admin funds, I think that's where I would want to see some of the budget get diverted into. So if we're, not hitting on legal, which is relatively high, we've got the other OTPS at 15 grand, which that's just built in as a contingency. So that's 15% of the total admin budget, just in case we had overruns, we could pull it out and put it wherever we wanted to. I think legal is, we probably put, you guys didn't do this. I probably baked a little bit too much into legal. And I probably baked a little bit too much into marketing at 7 grand. Until we have properties to market, we're probably not going to spend a lot of money on marketing. And we shouldn't need a lot of legal advice until we're actually dealing with real estate. So we might be able to move some of that around and put it into things like pre-development.
So what holes are you looking to fill today?
I was really hoping that the holes would be on the other budget sheet, and they really kind of It didn't build too much out into this. Yeah, this is, the interesting thing about this application is how narrative it is. I mean, even the budget is just 3 lines. Uh, And this is just kind of like cover sheet information. So I guess the idea is right now, what we're going to apply, what Galvin is going to be the applicant for the vacant rental improvement program, is going to be about $1.25 million. You can do about, if you're looking at $50,000 per unit, that's about 25 units across the county. And if the land bank is going to then match that at 50%, you would need to have about, what, 625 set aside, at the land bank level. So that I can't really build into the budget until we know if we get the vacant rental improvement program approved, which will probably be, the deadline for that is October 3rd. I would imagine it would be 2 months or so for them to make the announcement. So that would be the first week of December. But what we can do is have the rest of the land bank capital budget just ready to go. And then if we find out that we got that grant, then we can just add that 625 in. Homes and Community Renewal is a fan of having land banks supplement that. It solves a couple of issues. One, the vacant rental improvement program subsidy is not that deep. It's $50,000 per unit. It's fine. But one of the program eligibility requirements for that 50,000 is that the units are vacant because they're uninhabitable, basically. And $50,000 typically is not enough to bring a full unit from uninhabitable to habitable. The other issue that it solves is, in the wake of COVID and there's, supply chain issues, it's just a whole world of issues that has affected land banks spending their funds. There's been quite a bit of money committed to land banks by the state that hasn't moved anywhere. So being able to move land bank funds as a supplement to the VRIP program it's a win-win. So the landlords get extra subsidy, and the state gets to push some of the land bank money out of the state offers.
Chris, may I ask a question?
Yes.
Does the committee mind, excuse me,
No.
interjecting? Now, the vacant rental improvement funding, is that similar to the +1 ADU where it's not just to create rental, but it also could be for relatives of families doing the improvement on said vacant rental on their land? There's old accessory dwellings that are vacant, but $50,000 could actually reach that kind of renovative requirement, monetary requirement, or is it strictly for rentals?
It's for rentals, yeah, but I mean, the ADUs can be rentals as well, but it had to be for something that, so if you had a vacant garage, that's good to know, that wouldn't work, that's an accessory.
It's looking for mom and pop. It's looking for small quantities, right?
Yeah, this state keeps using that phrase, so it's only for, buildings that are up to 5 units. There's a preference, not a requirement, that any landlord that applies to the local program, owns fewer than 20 properties in their portfolio. It's not a requirement, it's just a preference. So the program is really for, you set some kind of like the way Repco is a local program administrator for the ADU program. In this case, Galvin is the applicant, so they would be the local program admin, should they win the award. And then individual landlords would apply to them for that $50,000 and they would do all the income verification, all the eligibility and all that. But it can be combined with other grant sources. So if someone did have, and you can do mixed use. So if someone wanted to add an ADU to a property, they might be able to combine both the +1 and the VRIP. State doesn't love that, it'd be a tough case to make, but I think it's within the realm of possibility.
But if you're adding an ADU,
Yeah, you're not converting a vacant unit.
no, you're
Yeah.
not.
So it'd have to be if you. Trying to think of a scenario where that would actually work. If you already had a second home on your property that was vacant.
Yeah.
But then that's a second residential unit, which disqualifies you from the +1 ADU. program.
ADU, but
I gotta walk through that. I'll find out, I'll talk to HCR.
And the other thing is,
there were similar stipulations of like 10-year.
yeah,
Oh, for the vacant rental?
Yeah.
Yes, so there's a 10-year period of affordability / monitoring period is what they call that. And it's the same thing. Someone can sell the property, but if they do, the restriction on the property follows the property.
and also you can't displace anybody. If somebody's living there, you can't move them
Yeah.
out, which is a an issue for some of these properties.
Yeah, that was one of the big questions. If you've got a landlord who hears there's money available, can they just go to their tenant and say, you need to leave? And then, access the money because they've created a vacant unit, but that is a clear consideration that HDR. They caught that beforehand.
What about? We're trying to get line items. For the budget, what if, somebody, say, takes one of our properties that we're foreclosing on. And then decides, we thought this was just gonna be a rehab, but now it's turned out to be more than that, so we have to use. Demolition costs, and then I'm sorry, the land bank, it has to use demolition costs. And then. Change it from just reconstruction or remodel to demolition and then building something else new. Is there ways to change some of these line items halfway through?
Yeah, that's happened kind of often, very often, land banks will, some of the foreclosure sales, and I think Columbia County operates this way as well, it's just. It's a black box, right? You're buying a building without getting inside of it. And the land banks that don't necessarily have really good relationships with their own foreclosing governmental units are in the same boat. They don't get a first look, they don't get any special consideration, it's just, here's a foreclosure list, if you want to try it. So some have developed scopes of work assuming that properties will be rehabs, and they get inside and they say, oh, this is a tear down. And the state is okay with that. But one of the things that most of the land banks have kind of made policy is that they acquire nothing unless there's a plan for that property. So they don't just acquire properties to bank them. They acquire properties specifically for some sort of redevelopment plan, demolition plan, or disposition plan already in place. All right, I think that's all I've got for this, unless there are more questions.
Any other questions?
One thing I'd like to do in the room is try to figure out when a good acquisition committee meeting might be. Is that, should I just go through Kelly?
Yeah.
Okay. And then our next meeting should be, well, it's whenever the Health and Human Services is. So we'll just continue to mirror that. I think that's all I got.
Any public comments? Supervisors?
Let me make sure there's no.
All right. If there's no public comments, a motion to adjourn? So move. Second? All in favor? Opposed, carried.
Oh.